Good morning, everyone, and a very happy New Year to you all. Please can I ask you to remain standing for the civic prayers read by the Reverend Daniel Burton. Thank you.
Heavenly Father, in your word you have given us a vision of that holy city to which the nations of the world bring their glory. Behold and visit, we pray, the city of Salford. Renew the ties of mutual regard which form our civic life. Bless our honest and able leaders. Enable us to eliminate poverty, prejudice and oppression, that peace may prevail with righteousness and justice with order, and that men and women from different cultures and with differing talents may find with one another the fulfillment of their humanity. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Item 1, announcements or special business. I've not been notified of any announcements or special business. Item 2, apologies. Do we have any apologies for today's council meeting? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do any members have any personal, prejudicial or disclosable pecuniary interests that need to declare at this meeting? Can I ask members with interest to now declare them, please? Item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of November 2015 and 16th of December 2015. Are the minutes of the meeting of the Council held on the 18th of November 2015 and 16th of December 2015 approved as a correct record? Thank you. Item 5. Do we have any petitions that need to be received? No. Item 6. Statement of licensing policy. The Executive Lead Member of Housing and Environment is asked to present the Statement of Licensing report, after which I will permit members to ask questions. Thank you.
The Statement of Licensing Policy and Gambling Statement are requirements under the respective acts to show how we as a licensing authorities address the stated objectives of crime disorder, protection of children, vulnerable persons, public nuisance and public safety. They have been updated with some fairly minor amendments, so can I just ask that we move them and accept them? Thank you very much.
Second. Any questions or comments? Councillor Wolfenshire.
So just to say on behalf of the licensing panel, we welcome these because these are what we have to work to, and I think it's right that we have these guidelines. I think certainly over the last 12 months we've had safeguarding officers visit our licensing panel to give us training on safeguarding, and I think anything that we need to look at for vulnerable people and children is first and foremost for us as City Council, so these are very welcome. Thank you.
Councillor Breeder, Reverend Breeder.
Particularly, I think, the fact that it strengthens the sort of information that we actually require from applicants. I think that's one of the most important parts of the policy. The fact that no longer will applicants be able to get away with providing scarce information, that they will have to pay far more attention to the application forms and actually put a lot more detail in them. So I welcome that, and I think it will help, certainly the licensing panel of which I'm a member, to actually be able to make better decisions based on much more detailed information.
Councillor Stone, please.
Thank you, Chair. In Salford, 4 years ago, Alcohol Concern found that the density of off-licences in Salford was second only to London. And as the licensing policy states, we've currently got over 500 licensed premises in the city. And we know that their density does correspond with higher rates of deprivation, alcohol-related crime and hospital admissions. In Salford, more people are admitted to hospital for alcohol-specific conditions than anywhere else in the country. and at a rate that's nearly 3 times the national average. So we do have a significant issue in the city. The number of people from Salford that are dying from alcoholic liver disease is nearly double the national average. And that's a problem that actually extends across Greater Manchester, with around 335 people dying each year because of that disease. I think given the scale of the challenge, I do welcome the emphasis the statement of the licensing policy places on the need to improve public health. I think the potential to restrict additional licences that are in problem areas that are already saturated with premises is a welcome element to the new Salford policy, and that is in line with Home Office guidance and national best practice. And I just thought it was also worth drawing members' attention to the potential, subject to central government approval, for devolution to allow the combined authorities in Greater Manchester to create a Greater Manchester-wide licensing policy as well. And that would enable us to share best practice across Greater Manchester, particularly in relation to responsible retailing, restricting the expansion of licensed premises in local areas where alcohol is causing significant concern. So I do welcome the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stone. Councillor Knight, please.
Yeah, just to come back on all of those, yes, the additions that people will note in here have included a statement about public health, and also we have added a section around dealing with saturation of number of premises in a particular area.
Thank you. Does Council agree to approve and adopt the Licensing Act 2003 Licensing Policy Statement 2016? All those in favour? Thank you. Item 7, Gambling Act 2005, Statement of Policy 2016. The Executive Lead Member of Housing and Environment is asked to present the Gambling Act 2005, Statement of Policy 2016, after which I will permit members to ask questions.
Okay, thank you. Again, there are no changes to the gambling policy, just minor amendments to some regulation concerning the number of machines on premises and how premises with fixed odds betting terminals, FOBTs apparently, control their usage. And those are the only amendments to that particular policy. So can I suggest we move that as well? Thank you.
Any questions or comments? Councillor Longshore.
Thank you, Chair. Again, these are welcomed on behalf of the licensing panel. I certainly think the strengthening regarding the number of machines in premises, but it still concerns me regarding the fixed odd betting terminals. You know, these are the crack cocaine of gambling, of machine use. And I think at some stage we as a council, and I certainly intend to do this, is to bring a notice of motion regarding fixed odd betting terminals, because they are an absolute bane to people, particularly people who've got an addiction to gambling. You just see them waste money that they cannot afford to waste, and it has also led to a serious number of violent incidents within premises. And so certainly I think all political parties need to work together to look at the demon that is fixed odd betting terminals. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Longshore. Councillor Clarkson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Councillor Warburton's pretty much just said it all for me, and much better than I can. These are the crack cocaine of gambling. I'm glad that we do have new regulations around the way that they'll be used, and I hope in the same way that Councillor Stone mentioned that we'll have a Greater Manchester-wide licensing policy. I hope that we can get together with our partners to think of a way that we can regulate these properly as well across Greater Manchester as more powers become available.
Thank you. Does Council agree to approve and adopt the Statement of Policy 2016? Agreed. Thank you. Item 8, Budget and Spending Review Implications for Family Poverty. The Executive Lead Member for Children's Services, Learning and Skills is asked to present the Budget and Spending Review Implications for the Family Poverty Report, after which I will permit members to ask questions, and you will have some additional information circulated by emails as requested by Cabinet. Thank you.
The additional information is basically some case studies about the illustration of the policies being followed at this moment in time. And I suppose doing this review at the moment, I'm going to talk briefly about the fact that actually even John Major now thinks that this government is on the wrong track in terms of dealing with equality. Recently he drew attention to the fact that inequality is increasing in this country as a result of government policies rather than being reduced. And the fact remains that when somebody like John Major notices that inequality is increasing, it really is time for like-minded Conservatives to take notice of the effects of their particular policies at this moment in time. And of course, the excuse that they always use is, well, it's the Labour Party's fault that we had the crash in terms of what actually happened. The fact that we spent too much money on hospitals and schools obviously resulted in the economies of Japan and the United States collapsing as a result of the policies being followed by this particular government. The reality of the situation is that we're now in a position where this government believes that tax cuts for the wealthy are rather more important than dealing with the issues of people at the bottom of the scale. And it gives me no pleasure to actually present what I think is a very damning indictment of the government's policy today, and to say that what we need to do is address those policies and do what we can to mitigate them. I just want to highlight, I'm obviously not going to go through the whole of the report, which I think obviously goes through a great deal of detail about the government's policies, but I just want to highlight the changes that have been made in the benefit programme that affects not just people who are on benefits because they're unemployed, but affects every single person across the country in terms of the approach that they've taken. So let me just go to page 8 and read out the changes that they've made. They've abolished the disability living allowance. They've transferred incapacity benefit claimants to employment and support allowance. They abolished the child trust fund. They abolished the health in pregnancy grant. They limited the social fund maternity grant to the first baby only. They've dealt with the working tax credit to try and limit the effect of that. They've abolished child benefit for higher rate taxpayers, despite Mr Cameron promising no changes in child benefit during the election campaign. Increased conditionality on low persons and people with health and disability issues. Replaced the council tax benefit with a local rebate scheme, and surprise, surprise, giving us 10% less money than the money it was actually costing the government to actually fund, giving Councillor Hines some real difficulties in terms of maintaining it. They've dealt with the crime loans and crisis loans and community care grants by abolishing it from April 2013, and again, surprise, surprise, transferring reduced funds to local authorities. Under the bedroom tax, one spare room will result in a 14% reduction in housing benefit, 2 or more spare rooms a 25% reduction, and the introduction of universal credit, a good idea which has been absolutely destroyed by this government in terms of what it was supposed to be, which was to establish a clearly understood basis for people, whether they were employed or unemployed, to receive. And of course, increased breach conditionality, which has already been spoken about elsewhere. Now, the reason I mentioned all of that is not because I am only wedded to the idea of supporting people on benefits. There has been a concerted attack on people who are actually poor. And the most farcical part of this is the attempt by the government to change the definition of poverty. Apparently, poverty is no longer a question of how much money or not that you actually have. Apparently, you can have virtually no money and still not be poor, providing you are living a virtuous life. Instead, they've tried to change the blame and tried to blame people for being poor by talking about things like alcohol abuse and so forth. All the things which judging by the previous policy, I'm in favour of. All of these things about tackling alcohol abuse, about tackling obesity, all of that I am in favour of. But it doesn't alter the fact that there are people in this country living lives of quiet desperation because they don't have enough money, and this government is determined to attack the money that they actually have available. Now, of course, I expect to hear from the other side about changes that Mr Osborne has recently made. And indeed, I welcome the fact that personal tax allowances have been increased, and he's talked about, for the first time, the living wage. But it doesn't actually alter the fact that it does not in itself lift sufficient people out of poverty. And the job of this council is to represent the people of Salford. Whether they're wealthy, whether they're poor, all are entitled to have a say in what actually happens in this city, and in for us to represent their interests. And if you approve this strategy today, which I hope you will, if you approve this, we will come back with a detailed series of recommendations as to the steps we can take to mitigate what the government is doing. Now, I can't promise this council that we will end the policies of this government, even though I'm striving elsewhere to make that happen. I can't promise this council that we will stop the effects of some of these policies, but I can promise this council that we will work to minimise the impact of those policies on the people of this city. And I call upon all people, whatever party they're in, to actually have a sense of decency, to actually have a sense of what it's like to live at the bottom of the pile, when you have to look at how many bedrooms you've got, when you have to look at the cuts that have taken place in benefit, when you have to actually work out about whether you feed yourself or whether you feed your family. All of that is a reality of modern day Britain, and in particular modern day Salford. Support this policy, I urge every single person to, and send a clear message to the government that actually those people who have got the biggest wealth in this country should be bearing the biggest burden of the changes that are required. Not those people on the bottom, not those people who can least afford it, and not those people who, as John Major is pointing out, are becoming more and more unequal in this society that we're trying to create. I urge you to support this.
Okay. So, Lindy, do you want to speak? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Ceremonial Mayor. This is an extremely important issue, and it would have been nice to have had a measured debate on it. But of course, what we've actually had, of course, is a party political broadcast on behalf of the Labour Party, that's increasingly a narrow, far-left sect. And it's difficult to listen to a Labour Party when we now have a Labour Party that wants to ban a whole stack of company dividends, which would hit the pension pots of ordinary working people across Salford and across the country. And we have a Labour Party now that wants to spend billions of pounds on nuclear submarines without any nuclear warheads, and just send them sailing around the country, around the world. And I'm not quite sure, it's possibly the most batty proposal I've ever heard from a political leader. What, by still spending billions on the submarines? Well, I won't interrupt Councillor Jones when I'm sure he chooses to speak later. But the truth is, Mr. Ceremonial Mayor, that the best way to prevent family poverty is to make sure that families have access to work, have access to decent, well-paid work. And I would hope that the Labour members opposite will work with us and work with the government to try and make even further strides in that area. And we know that huge strides have already been made in that area, both in Salford and across the country. Because if you look compared to 2010, unemployment in Salford and across the country has fallen and fallen enormously, and there are a record number of people in this city and across the country who are in work. Big multinational companies and British firms are choosing to invest, choosing to create jobs, and they're choosing to create jobs here in Salford, and that is much to be welcomed. Councillor Murray talks about some of the tax changes as if they're insignificant, as if they're not a big deal. But if you're a minimum wage worker full-time in Salford, you're paying less than half the income tax that you were in 2010. Thousands of workers in Salford have been removed from paying income tax entirely. If they're low earners, if they're part-time, they're not paying any income tax at all now. A huge bonus into people's pockets. We've seen new investment in transport. The Northern Rail franchise, which was announced the other week, opposed by the Labour Party, doubling the number of trains through Walkden and Swinton, increasing services through Eccles and Patricroft, and making sure that people have the chance to get to work. The Odsal Cord work's about to start on the Odsal Cord again, a massive investment in transport in Salford and in Greater Manchester, allowing people to get to work and access the employment that's being created. We've had investment in affordable housing. If you look in Little Hulton or in Barton or in Eccles, we've had huge numbers of new affordable houses built with support from the Homes and Communities Agency. And let's not forget that the Salix transfer, enabling further investment in our social housing in Salford, was only made possible through government support in terms of writing off debts and allowing that transfer to happen. I don't want to keep going and going, but I could. But we talked, I think Councillor Murray mentioned, we've had an announcement of a massive increase in the minimum wage now, above and beyond what the Labour Party were crowing about before the general election for Ed Miliband's announcement. By 2020, the government's national living wage will be above and beyond the policy that Ed Miliband announced before the election. A huge boost for low earners. There is much more to do, and I hope that we can work together to do that, but we're not going to do that with a one-sided debate just bashing the government when there's a lot of good going on, a lot of positive stories, a lot of people benefiting from government policy, earning more, being taxed less, and better off for it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
One, two. I did wonder when Councillor May would suddenly burst into action. I don't know, he's got the nerve to criticise this government when he belongs to a party whose leader, Mr Corbyn, would leave this country undefended. Whoever would dream that you would send out submarines without arms on them, without missiles on them? And if you cannot guarantee the security of your country, and your party is not guaranteeing the security of the country, then nothing else is anything. First and foremost is the security of the realm, and all the rest follows. So if you want the things that you want, please defend our country and urge your leader to do so. I've told you before, Mr Jones, your manners leave a lot to be desired in council. I don't do that to you, and I don't expect anyone to do it to me. You're a very nice fellow, but you don't have the manners, I'm afraid. Things like pointing and interceding, but he has apologised, and I accept that. As I say, he's a good man. But no, I'm not going to go any longer you have the nerve to get up with a leader that's willing to send submarines out without warheads. It's absolutely disgraceful.
Thank you, Mr. Ceremonial Mayor. Well, I don't know what Councillor Turner's points were on poverty there, in the sense that what the statement was about. You know, and I'll just this on defence. I don't think we're defending ourselves against with a nuclear bomb, and therefore, as Roger Jones has just said, press the button and we're all dead. So we can have that debate elsewhere. But on the actual issues of poverty, there is no doubt. I come from a generation, luckily, by the way, just born at the end of the war, which is perhaps the most luckiest generation of all, quite frankly, either before or what's looking going forward. We came from a generation where we were still living at times in poverty, many people in poverty, but at least it was growing better day by day through all those years. And it used to be the discussions when we had talks was about relative poverty, about whether people were as well off as the people next door or down the road. It was relative by and large. We're now talking about real poverty, and have been for a long, long time. And this government is determined to look after whatever we say, however they look at personal tax or whatever else. They'll make sure that they increase other taxes or deny other benefits to people, as Councillor Merry has quite rightly said. They are a party for the rich and the powerful. There is no question about that. You know, and they're also a part of a world that believes, and you saw the report the other day, where 62 people, it is said, 62 people have as much wealth as 3.5 billion people. Where are the Tories attacking that worldwide? Never mind in Britain. And we can see, however Councillor Inley tries to colour it up, we can see the real problems with poverty time and time and time again. The chief executives in the FTSE are now 185 times better than the average wage. Even when Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister, when she finished in 1990, it was 19 times greater. It's now 185 times greater. You know, now if that's the case, is it any wonder many people are living in poverty? It's a one-sided country with a government that talks about a national government, but it's one-sided, time and time again. And of course, not today. I hope that we have a debate later, sooner than later. The wheels are coming off this government's economic policies. It's only a couple of months ago, Osborne was talking about how the garden was rosy. The other week he talked about the forthcoming crisis. And he blames everybody else. Little bit like Arthur Daley, isn't he? You know, whenever he's in trouble, he blames somebody else. Well, Osborne's the same. Blame somebody else. And he's the Chancellor of a country that's supposed to be uniting people. Yet we live amongst ourselves. And I'm sure the Mayor can comment at the local flooding that we've just had, where he's seen poverty like never before, where people can't afford to insure themselves. Okay, Mr. Mayor. Can't afford to insure themselves. Councillor Early talks about pensions. Loads of people in this country cannot afford to be in a pension. That's the real poverty that we're talking about. As I say, I'm a lucky one. I come from a generation where there was more or less full employment, on good wages, improving. I bought my house, 90% on my estate, bought my house when we were 20-odd-year-old. How many people can do that today? I would submit, Mr. Mayor, very few. Thank you.
Sorry, John? Yeah, go ahead. It is interesting, isn't it, that when the Conservatives, when these issues are brought up, very serious issues about the real lives and poverty of people in this city, that the Conservatives simply resort to the Central Office playbook, which is ignoring the issue, and trotting out stuff about foreign policy, Trident. It's all written out, you can read it all the time. If you read the comments section on any of the online newspapers, as I do in The Guardian, you'll see that virtually word for word parroted over and over by trolls who possibly are, or certainly are supporting the Tory party. It's just a way of evading the issue. But, I mean, we're going to have to call Ian Lindley Mr. Pangloss now, aren't we? Because, you know, this was a very, very rosy prescription for where we are at the moment economically and how it's affecting our people. I was reading recently in the New Statesman an article by the eminent economist Lord Sadelsky. It says this: the unpalatable truth is that austerity in the face of private sector collapse of 2008-2009 has weakened our ability to produce output. Britain has been left overfinanced, overborrowed and underinvested. It is not surprising that it is exceptionally exposed to any global downturn. And then he goes on to say, if I can find it, but I'll paraphrase it if I can't, it's a rather long article, that there's this huge productivity gap. What's happened in this recovery is that we are underproductive by a massive amount. The economy today, its productivity is 15% below where it would have been on normal trends, and we've nowhere near picked that up. And that's why people talk about unemployment, and it's low. The reason it's low is because we now have a large number of insecure, low-paid, underproductive jobs. That's how the economy is surviving and supposedly moving forward. Not productivity, not good jobs, not jobs that are well paid, which give people security to have a home and to raise their family, but underproductive, poorly paid, insecure jobs. Many of them propped up by tax credits, which are being cut. And yes, the new national minimum wage, it's not a real living wage. It will help some people. But if you're having that clawed back by tax credit cuts at the same time, then it's not going to do you all that much good. So these are the issues that this report needs to address and which the Tories are trying to evade by going on about reading off their Tory Central Office crib sheets because they don't want to talk about the real issues which are facing our people in this city.
Councillor Stone, please.
Thank you, Chair. To be honest, I thought this paper spoke for itself, but I'm disgusted to hear the opposition banging on about party politics and party leaders and trying to gloss over the stark reality that's being faced by our residents in Salford every day. It's in black and white in the paper in front of you. And I can tell you something for nothing. The people who are struggling to pay for food and pay for the heating now don't give two hoots about the odds or cord or what might happen in 2020 because they're hungry now and they're cold now. There are a couple of other things to add. Unfortunately, the situation is made even worse by the attack on workers' rights by this government, who have increased the period of time that you have to work for an employer before you can make a tribunal claim from 1 year to 2 years. And on top of that, they've introduced fees for you to make a tribunal claim. So, for example, if your employer makes illegal deductions from your wages, you have to pay £390 to make a claim and have a hearing. Or, if they sack you unfairly, if you're unfairly dismissed, you have to pay £1,200. Now, if your employer has illegally taken your wages, or your employer has sacked you, what do you pay that with? In addition to this, access to justice has been removed for many of our residents, with the removal and cuts to legal aid, meaning that people are not able to get the advice they need about these savage cuts and changes to the welfare system and to their rights. Now, Councillor Merry read through the long list of things that are affecting our residents, but I do think we also need to remind ourselves about the savage regime of benefit sanctions which are being imposed on our residents daily and in most cases totally unfairly. I spoke to a worker from Salford Unemployed Resource Centre yesterday, because I sit on the board, and she tells me that between September 2014 and September 2015, just from the resource centre, they made 68 referrals to the mustard tree. 74% of those were due to benefit sanctions. This is people who can't eat because their benefits have been sanctioned. 12% were waiting for the first benefit payment, and just 8% were due to other reasons, such as relationship breakdowns. Now, our residents are being hit from all angles by this government, and I think we just need to be really clear about that. There are also obvious health implications of poverty, which I won't go into detail about. I expect that many members can imagine from the top of their head what many of those issues are. And I've already discussed this with our Director of Public Health, who is committed to lend his full support to the development of a revised strategy. And I think it's absolutely vital for the people who live in this city that we actually do that. So I commend the report and the suggestions within it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to speak today, but having heard the contributions from the other side, I was incentivised to do so. I don't know if you listen to Just a Minute on the radio. Nicholas Parsons is in your role, chairing the panel of trying to stop them, or the panel trying to speak for 60 seconds without hesitation, deviation or repetition. And I was at one stage going to stand up. If I'd got a buzzer to press, I'd have buzzed it, because the amount of deviation that was coming from Councillor Lindley was quite amazing. Standing up accusing Councillor Merry of making a party political broadcast, and then going on doing even more of that, talking about the government's policy. Of course, there's a reason why they do that. There's a reason why they do it. Councillor Jolly has talked about the way that they try to take us away from the subject. And that's because they've got no idea whatsoever of how ordinary people in this city live. I was at the Unemployed Centre yesterday, and Councillor Stone has stolen my thunder in quoting those figures. But that is the effect of government policy. Those are the government policies that are affecting the people of this city and causing the amount of poverty, deprivation, starvation that exists. And I'll leave it at that, Chair.
I really think it's a bit rich of Councillor Merry to start criticising the government for its policies with regard to poverty. Can I just start by reminding Councillor Merry that for 45 years we've had Labour in control in the city. 45 years, and over all of that time you have not managed to do anything constructive about poverty in this city. And you talk about the Conservatives, you've got a nerve, Councillor Merry. And during that period of time, you've also worked on the 13 years of a Labour government. And have you solved the poverty problem? No. So even with a Labour council of 45 years and a Labour government, certainly consistently over a 30-year period, you've still not managed, Councillor Merry, to actually solve the poverty problem. So don't start complaining about the Conservative government who've done more about poverty in the last 6 years than you've done in 45 years. Let's get the record straight, Councillor Merry. You want to talk about politics, we'll talk about politics. The only thing you can do, Councillor Merry is talk the talk. Very good at that. But you weren't very good when you presented your report this morning. In fact, what did you actually say? Very, very little. No detail. All you could do, in fact, was refer to a long list of changes which the Conservative government have made. And one of those changes you referred to was reducing child benefits for those on the higher tax rate. How hypocritical can you be, Councillor Merry, when a few moments before that you were talking about the Conservatives actually only being interested with the higher taxpayers and reducing the tax for them, and then in the next breath you criticise us for taking action for those that can afford to pay. Where are you getting your figures from, Councillor Merry? You can't just pick up a list and not explain the benefits of that list to the people of this city. And you have a lot to answer for the people in this city who are suffering from poverty. You've had your chances, you've failed, and you're going to have to move over. And certainly, no, as far as I'm concerned, you are going to move over because you're going to get a different administration in this council. You can laugh all you like. Facts. Let's wait until May the 6th and we'll find out what's happened. Let's talk about the rich and powerful that the Conservatives are only concerned about. But let's talk about the dozens, in fact, tens of dozens of millionaires in the Labour Party. Don't know count? Let's talk about lunatics like Bernie Ecclestone, who gave £10 million and had to give it back to him. People like that supported the Labour Party. So don't talk about the Conservative Party only being the party of the rich. It applies to the Labour Party if those are the sort of criteria that you apply. In terms of the wheels coming off the economy, which I think Councillor Jolly referred to. Hines wasn't sorry Councillor Hines, so I was trying to be kind to you this morning, which Councillor Hines referred to. We have the best economy in Europe. The best economy in Europe, and one of the best economies in the developed world. So talk about the economy, wheels coming off the economy, you're so far off the mark, Councillor Hines, that I think you need to go back, stop reading the Morning Star, start reading some decent papers, and you might in fact get some information. Just one final point, and this is something which really, really annoys me, Chair, and that is, and it's come up once today, it's come up from Councillor Ferguson. He seems to think that the Labour Party are the only people that know how people live in this city. How wrong can you be, and how hypocritical can you be? We are ordinary people on this side. We've come up from ordinary roots. I've come up from living in a toast house. I've been on the dole. I know what it's like. So don't tell me that the Labour Party is the only ones that know how people in poverty live in this city.
Thank you, Chair.
Can we have a bit of order?
We've had a very interesting debate so far, and I've always worked all of my life, and I've paid into the system, and I now hope when I retire I will get something out of the system. And I was able to do that because I had a relatively decent salary, and I was also able to pay from that salary into a pension scheme. The problem there, as Councillor Hines, I think, has pointed out, and this is where poverty is going to be extremely impactful in a few years' time. We know that there is automatic enrolment for pensions, but the reality is, when you give people the choice to sign up to their pensions, if they're on low pay, then they just simply can't afford that 20 or 30 or 40 pounds per month in order because they've got to pay for the bills. That's the reality of it. So in theory, it's good that everybody should be paying into a pension scheme, but if they're not earning sufficient money to save in order to pay into that pension scheme, then I'm afraid it's only in words and not in action. And that's the reality. You have driven down salaries and wages to a point where actually it's beginning to affect the very important group that run the economies worldwide, and that is the middle classes. Not the chief executives and their £1 million incomes and all the rest of it, not necessarily the poorer people, rather the middle class are now beginning to feel that significant impact, and they are beginning to
object, and I think this is where we're beginning to reach a tipping point, not just in the UK, but in the United States as well. The famous middle class in America are now beginning to feel the pinch, because as Councillor Hines has rightly said, the extremely wealthy are piling up fortunes for themselves, and they're beginning to ignore the very important hard-working middle class, or the people who run the economies, the people who run organisations, the people who run society, the people who run business, and all the rest of it. And we're beginning to touch on a tipping point, I believe. And that could well come. There probably is going to be another crash before 2020. And the governments aren't going to have the funds to bail out the banks, and I think that we're moving towards a very, very critical point in history, unless there's a significant change in the way we organise society. And that does mean paying people reasonable pay, reasonable salaries. People shouldn't have to work in 4 or 5 jobs, not just to provide the nice little extra bits to buy the newer car, to add on the kitchen to the house or whatever. They have to work in 3 or 4 jobs in order to keep body and soul together, in order to keep shoes on the kids' feet and so on. That's the reality. That's where we are currently, and that's where the strength of the unfair economic conditions are beginning to impact on so many hard-working people in middle class and the lower paid communities. The Vicar earlier on said we need to alleviate poverty, discrimination and prejudice and so on. You are not alleviating poverty, in fact you're adding to it. We've seen a report recently about food banks. There has been an exponential growth in food banks. And you say, Councillor, that the Labour Party has done nothing for poorer people across the nation. There have been very, very few food banks in the UK until very recently. We're reaching to a point now where those organisations that supply food to the food banks are beginning to say that they can no longer sustain it. That hasn't happened under any Labour government. It hasn't happened under any Liberal government before that, actually, but it's happening under your Tory government. That's the reality that's happening. I just want to touch on we're beginning to become a food bank Britain. And that's very sad, I think, for the Tories to be able to say, food bank Britain is now here, it's present, and that's the reality of it. You mentioned about nuclear. I'm not a great fan of nuclear, I must be honest. I've been a member of C&D for a number of years. And I just take a rational approach to this. The reality is that we say that we will not have a first strike. Nobody's going to want to push the button. But you say it provides security, and to some degree it may well, psychologically, but British territory has been invaded by both a non-nuclear nation and a nuclear nation. The Falklands, for example, Argentina are not a nuclear power, but they invaded the Falklands. It didn't provide security there, so it didn't stop the Argentinians doing that. America invaded Grenada when Margaret Thatcher was in power, under Ronald Reagan, if you recall, and America, of course, is a nuclear power, so there were 2 nuclear powers, if you like, who were at competition here, but it didn't prevent the Americans from doing that either. So it doesn't provide the security, the imaginary security that you say it does. So I just make that point for thought. And I would rather spend the £100 billion in public money that we're going to invest in a defence system that we are never going to use, and invest that into reducing the number of food banks and the number of other poverty ideas that you as a Tory government are beginning to cause. So thank you, Chair.
I thought the debate spoke for itself, the paper spoke for itself, and I expected, and I do expect, a unanimous support for this paper. But I have to say, it saddens me when I see false opposition parading as effective opposition. And I'm disappointed in the Conservative group members who have spoken. It's specious, and I keep explaining that that's true-sounding lies. For Councillor Lindley to stand right at the beginning, he's the first speaker in this debate, and he stands and said, there's no debate. Yet he was the first speaker in the process of having a debate. Several members of this council have spoken this very serious and important debate. He then turned to try and make it a national issue for the reasons that some contributors from the Labour benches have said. Obfuscation. The ability to try and cover by putting something else in its place. It didn't work. And it was so blatant the people of this city and wider will see through it. This nonsense about the nuclear debate doesn't matter. Let me remind Councillor Lindley and inform him, because he clearly doesn't know, that a single warhead today is 200 times more powerful than the bombs that were dropped in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And it isn't only a debate. I'm a proud member, lifelong, of CMD. I would love to see nuclear weapons removed completely. But I'm also a pragmatist and realistic that it is really a multilateral reduction that's the reality. And so, the question of whether Britain, with its common sense approach in the main, should be at the table internationally is something I support. But you know, it then becomes a real issue if you start to look at what was implied from the Labour benches. If we are to keep, and I do commend the leader of the Labour Party for developing this discussion, if we are to keep the Trident nuclear defence submarines, there's about half a dozen of them, then there's supposed to be, there's only a small number of them, but there's supposed to be some nuclear weapons to be used. And it was completely wrong of the leader of the opposition to say that the intention was to keep the delivery system, Trident, without any weapons to fire. That is a complete and utter nonsense. The question arises, and the validity of it is how many weapons. And from a sedentary position, Councillor Jones mouthed the correct statement. Do we need hundreds and hundreds of nuclear weapons when effectively, as soon as one is fired and the response is returned, the game's up? The game's up for the human race, should such a process start. So the question of whether we reduce the number of nuclear weapons is a very pertinent issue for poverty. Why is that? Because it costs billions and billions of pounds to keep those hundreds of nuclear weapons that we don't need and, in my view, will never ever use. When you then turn to the more local arguments, I have to say that the top and bottom of this poverty discussion, because it's always theoretical, it's always a matter of debate, but what does it mean in reality? Luckily, most of us in this room don't suffer poverty and we're not in deprivation. I'll tell you this, there are councillors in this room that I know that money is very tight for. But real poverty that Councillor Hines was addressing, when I was born into a single room with 5 of us in a condemned tenement just outside Glasgow, I didn't know why it was called the Buggy Building. I only understood that when I was 11. And when the council condemned the building and destroyed it and moved us to a brand new council house when I was 7, I had my first political thought. A council must be a good thing because it gave us a nice house to live in. That was a political thought. And I have to tell you that last week, the theory, the actual effects of poverty was laid bare during those floods, where we saw visibly for the first time the cumulative effect of the government cuts on the people of Salford. It's that cumulative effect that this report addresses. And by the way, I'll finish on this, Chairman. Councillor Garrido said that the Labour Party had done nothing in 45 years. I say it did, and it has done, and it will continue to do. The question here is, who do the people of Salford believe? The people of Salford have returned this Labour group to the council every year for 45 years, and nonsense about what will happen in May is yet to be seen. But I'll make this prediction. Labour Party, with the support of the people of Salford, will still control this council and will still try to mitigate against the ridiculous failed economic policies of this government.
Councillor Collinson, please.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that's concerned me about the debate this morning is the fact that each side is blaming the other side for a lot of issues that, quite frankly, are not within our control. Nobody once this morning has mentioned the word family, and I brought this up at AGMA scrutiny actually last week. It's as if we're all saying here that we're responsible for everybody else's misfortunes. People have to take some responsibility for themselves. If you can't afford to have a large family, you don't have a large family. If you can't afford to do the things that, like, have the plasma TV and the posh cars and whatever, you don't have it. You've got to prioritise the money that you've got. We've got to look more closely at how families work, and as I'm always banging on about, early intervention, education, and all those areas, they need to be considered, and money needs to be put into those areas so that families understand about life and the fact that, God willing, we're all going to be here for a long time. You can't just spend it when you've got it and then not have anything left. And I'm sorry I'm going on about it, I feel so strongly about it, that we're all talking about the government doing this and the Labour Party doing that and the Conservatives doing this and whatever. We've got to prioritise, and as far as I can see, nobody's doing it. Thank you.
Where do I begin? Perhaps I ought to start by thanking Councillor Lindley, because I think it's probably the first time in my political life that I've ever been accused of being an extreme left-winger, part of a narrow sect. I don't know if Councillor Lindley realises how much good that's done me in terms of my own credibility. Right? And I'll pay you afterwards for that. So. But the reality of the situation is that what have we had from the Conservatives today? We've had a rising tide of hysteria, quite frankly. They are embarrassed to give them their due about their record of their government on tackling poverty. So they'd rather talk about anything. I expected Councillor Turner to start talking about the weather rather than talking about poverty, which is the actual issue that we're supposed to be debating. And just to make it absolutely clear, I'm taking no lectures from that side about the security of this country and the failures that they've actually been responsible for over the years, of course. We need to remind ourselves of this from time to time. It was, of course, the Conservative Party that sought to appease Hitler just before the war. It was, of course, the Tory Party that actually managed to lose the Falklands by their own miscalculation of what the Argentinians did. And it was, of course, the Tories that believed in a systematic running down of conventional forces in order to actually pay for Trident. I actually think you've got a lot to be ashamed of in terms of where you're failing. Mr. Mayor, can you sort of explain to Councillor Garrido that if he's going to accuse other people of interrupting him, it's probably not a good idea to interrupt me, right? Because he was part of the rising tide of hysteria talking about other things. And just to nail this before I get onto the real issues, right? This government is actually in the process of changing the rules about the funding of political parties. It's doing that in order to ensure that wealthy companies that happen to back the Tories have no restrictions on the way that they actually spend their money, while ordinary trade unionists have to jump through hoops before they actually can be allowed to spend their money in the way that they want. And this is deliberate policy on behalf of the Conservative Party to actually create an unlevel playing field for political parties so that the wealthy people, like in America, have the ability to spend their money in support of the parties that they choose to support. And finally, very finally, there is a country, two countries actually, where their policies have been specifically rejected. One, interesting enough, is the United States. Councillor Hines will know about this. The United States chose an anti-austerity program, actually, thanks to President Obama. They chose to inject money into the economy, and they are performing a lot better than we are as a direct result. They've actually raised their interest rates because their economy is doing so much better. In this country, the Bank of England doesn't dare to raise interest rates to damage the actual increase that is taking place, the very slow growth rate that we've got. And Canada was always a country, I think, was it you that used to quote Canada as a magnificent example when the actual Liberal Party that actually won that election did so by promising not to implement the same policies as the Tories, and the result is they got a landslide victory. Now, I want to deal specifically with this employment issue because what the Tories are left with, having sort of tried to shrug off what they're doing on benefit, is to say, well, look at all the people we're getting into work. The people are on low pay, 0-hour contracts, and the living wage does not help young people under 25 because they're not eligible for the living wage. So the reality of the situation is getting people off benefits into low-paid jobs is the Tory strategy. And don't lecture us about an anti-poverty strategy. It was the 1945 Labour government that put in a basic safety net for people, which your party opposed at the time. And it has been our party that has delivered on getting people out of poverty. It's not been perfect, but we made a substantial difference.
Thank you, everybody. Council is asked to, 1, note the contents of this report, 2, consider developing a refreshed family poverty strategy or creating a new all-age tackling poverty strategy. We've run over by about 25 minutes on that, just to make everybody aware. Item 9, notice of... There's no distance. All those in favour? All those against? Okay. Motion carried.
Any abstentions?
Any abstentions? What to... Okay, item 9, notice of motion, severe weather conditions and floods across Greater Manchester. We've also had an amendment submitted by Councillor to the motion by Councillor Turner. The proposer of the motion, Councillor Dawson, is asked to move this motion and Councillor Cohen to second the motion, after which I will permit members to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, the congratulations. Obviously, we probably had more discussion this morning, but on the floods, it's just an example of the great work the fire, the Greater Manchester Fire Brigade has been doing in connection with many other agencies. But this motion is really about finance. It's the way the government's carried out its cuts, and that's why I'll go into more detail, that there have been many cuts across the country on the fire brigades, but Greater Manchester has suffered twice as bad as many others, and yet, as this motion points out, we don't just have a local responsibility of the floods in Salford, it's the floods in the whole northwest Greater Manchester was involved in, and right across the country. Greater Manchester will be called into Yorkshire, and an international crisis, they go abroad. So Greater Manchester Firefields are different than many other fire brigades across the country. But Greater Manchester is being asked to take a 3.7% cut, double the national average of 2% in the fire. And this is a decision that's been taken by the national government. strange to understand when Greater Manchester have been working with the government to do a lot of collaboration, working with the police, working with all the other agencies to deliver what has been a really top-grade service. Just a bit of history. The last 4 cuts, which you see in the motion again, the last 4 years, Greater Manchester's taken some big hits. It's not just the backroom services, it's the front firemen. It says in the motion, 200. The new cuts, there's no other way of describing it, but it will be firefighters. You can't avoid reducing the number of firefighters in the next 4 years if we do not get extra money, or this government will review what it's suggesting here of 3.7%. Because that will be really significant in the number of firefighters. If you haven't got the firefighters, well, the fire engines, what's the point? So that they'll have to be reduced. Different ways of doing things, yes, and we're always looking at that, and Councillor Lindley knows with everybody from all parties have been working to that aim in Greater Manchester. There's been some great work in the Fire Authority. But we cannot get away from the fact of a big cut, and there ain't any other way of tackling the cuts without massive reduction in the fire service. Come back to the police, because obviously we might be referred to when we do the amendment, because the police have got an alteration in their budget. So I'm saying this is not a motion just to say it can't be done, because the police have just had a similar debate. The incident in Paris highlighted that need for additional police and the finances. The national terrorism, but the fire brigade will actually have to work if we have a terrorist incident similar to Paris. Not just the police, it's a joint action. So again, why not review and reconsider the actual amount? There's a huge amount of work the fire brigade do. I know that. See, the CRIT team, for people who don't know, it's working with the ambulance, and it's been responding to a lot of incidents in Salford where elderly people have fallen, they've had even cardiac arrests. It's whatever service can get to it first. Great work, as I said, good examples which are being put all over the country now as an example of Salford and other Wigan and Manchester with the leaders in this CRIT team. Great work. But that is all at risk. We won't have the money for those extra things. So that means that the ambulance service will be put under pressure as well. So it's false economy to put the fire brigade under so much pressure by these cuts. So I said, I won't go over too much on the flooding, because I think that will be well debated shortly. But it is the budget, and I looked at the amendment, and I said, Chair's going to just refer to the quicker the amendment. I don't think it helps, and there's one or two factual things which I'm not, but I'll wait till the amendment's put on the floor before. Yeah, I'll leave it till then. Yeah. So, but the key thing is, if people remember what this motion is for. Recognition of the work the fire brigade do, but also the most important thing, because with all the goodwill in the world, the best fire crews, the best equipment, the initiatives, what we all come along with, you still need money to pay for firefighters and equipment of the best which we should be entitled to. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Councillor Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. I've only been recently a member of the Fire Authority, and I have to say it's an incredible operation. They're passionate about the people of Salford in this region, and they are selflessly putting themselves at risk every day to save and ensure the safety of this city and this region. And they are efficiently working. They are, as you couldn't say, efficiency savings has always been implemented there. That's a word I hate, because efficiency often means really just cutbacks. And then you strip to the bone these people. We've got brave men and women working at the front line, supporting us. I'm sure the Mayor mentioned later on about the floods. They were there in the operation room, coordinating defence and how we deal with it. You know, they are part of our flood defence team, and that's an issue that's obviously going to get worse. And you know, we've got a challenging future ahead of us on that front alone. Never mind the continued rescuing emergency services they carry out throughout the region. So I'm not going to explain what Councillor Dawson said, but just repeat that efficiency savings do equate to job losses and people being taken out of those positions, and reducing fire machines and units on the field and in the front line. So I have to think very carefully about what the future of this service is and try our best to protect it. Thank you, Chair.
Is it on? Yeah. Thank you, Chair. But I hope you've all read the amendment that's in front of you. I don't think there's much in there that disagrees with what Councillor Dawson has been saying. Of course we hold the fire services and we applaud the work they've done. And if you read the amendment, I don't see any issues, to be honest with you. And I think, and I hope you will support it. But we on this side have never had any issues about writing or lobbying government to get the best possible outcome for the city. And we still believe in that. That's what we're here for. But we are of the opinion, to get these best outcomes possible, the facts and the language used are vitally important. And our amendment does exactly this, and I would urge you to support it.
Thank you, Mr. Ceremonial Mayor. It's been a great honour to be one of Salford's representatives to the Fire Authority over the last few years, and one thing I've learned very much is that the Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service have always been at the real forefront of innovation. If you look back as far as 1979, which was 4 years before I was even born, the work that the Greater Manchester Fire Authority, led I believe by Ian McCartney, who went on to become the Labour MP for Makerfield, did after the Woolworths fire in Manchester around retardant materials and fire safety standards was extraordinary, and it's saved thousands, if not tens of thousands of lives since. And I think the Greater Manchester Fire Service have always taken that baton and run with it. And that has meant, over not just the last 5 or 6 years, but over the last 10 or 15, looking at how the service moves towards a service that focuses as much on prevention as it does on protection and response. And actually, if you look back at the numbers of firefighters over the service, hundreds of firefighter posts were reduced under a Labour government and under a Labour-run authority, because that was the way in which we ran a more efficient service. By increasing focus on prevention, it meant that less people were having to be rescued from fires, less fires were having to be put out. And that is something that has continued over the last few years through a Labour-run authority, through a Conservative Liberal Democrat-run authority. And we've seen the benefits of that. The number of fires in Greater Manchester, the number of incidents, the number of people affected continues to fall. It still continues to fall, even with some of the difficult decisions around funding that have had to be made. Now, I want to see as much funding as possible go into the Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service, and I hope that the amendment that Councillor Turner has put forward, and I'm delighted to second, will do that. And we're more than happy to work with the government to try and get the best possible settlement but we have to do it amicably and we have to do it in a positive way, otherwise we're going to go down, we're going to find ourselves disappointed, and that is the reason behind the amendment. But, I know that all members of the Fire Authority, whatever their political persuasions, are committed to providing the best service that we can. My very first Fire Authority meeting was just after a very serious incident where a number of residents died and one firefighter was very seriously injured, and I've never forgotten that, and I've never forgotten that introduction to my introduction to the fire service, to show just how brave the firefighters are, just how much they really do put their lives on the line for us every day, and I'm committed to continuing to do that. So I hope that you can support this amendment and we can work together to make sure that we get the best settlement possible for the fire service. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Councillor Grado, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, can I reiterate the comments that have been made by other members concerning the work which has been done by Greater Manchester Fire. Not just, of course, in the recent floods, but over many, many years. I think, as Councillor Lindy pointed out, we've been responsible for many new innovations in terms of trying to prevent fire, and that's obviously foremost in the fire service's minds. But can I also couple not only the work that the fire service have done, which is also commendable, works extremely hard over the Christmas period, but can I also couple that with the work that our own officers and operatives have carried out in partnership with them, over the difficult weeks that we've just experienced. I think Salford Council needs to be extremely proud of the way our staff have actually responded to the crisis over the last few weeks. And I think the fact that we've worked so closely with Greater Manchester Fire shows what a good partnership we have with the fire service in this city. And that brings me really to another point, before I go on to the amendment in any detail, and that is that I think it's extremely important that not only when this service passes to the control of the Greater Manchester Mayor, but I think it's also important that the Mayor of this city retains as much influence as possible, on things such as the fire service, when that control shifts to Greater Manchester. So I would certainly urge whoever is the city Mayor to make sure, in fact, that Salford continues with its forthright views on the fire service in the way that it should be conducted. Now, just briefly on the amendment, I'm not going to go on for very much longer. Can I just say, in fact, that there's absolutely no reason at all, Chair, why this amendment cannot be supported, by everyone in this council chamber. The reason is that all it does, in fact, is gets away from talking about inaccurate figures. I'm afraid there are a number of inaccuracies in the figures, within the motion. I'd really resist it to actually talking about the global accurate figures. Having accepted that these figures are more accurate in the amendment, then certainly, as Councillor Turner has said, we will never shy away from supporting this city if it means talking to government ministers, if it means trips to London. We have always agreed to do that for the benefit of residents of the city. So I would urge the members to actually support the amendment on the basis that it doesn't include inaccurate information, but actually makes it a more rounded resolution in total.
When the amendment came this morning, I was a bit surprised at it and I'm clearer now. Because as far as I'm concerned, if there's something wrong with the figures in our resolution, then tell us what they are, and that figure can be put in as a correct figure. But our opinion of across Greater Manchester is that is the correct figure, but we're open to suggestions on knowing where it isn't correct. But I don't see why you needed to put an amendment. The amendment would have been just purely to alter the figure, and it isn't. So my question is not why we needed, why we can't support the amendment, is why we need the amendment in the first place.
Councillor Dawson, please. You want your comment? The city there, sorry, if you speak slightly in one time. It's okay, Councillor Dawson. On the amendment, please.
Right, thank you, Chair.
Yeah, when I read through the amendments, I was wondering what has been changed here. We're talking about 15.8 million over the next 4 years. It's in the motion. The document, I think you can sort of refer to 3.72 million over the next 3. There is a little. But the figures are from the Greater Manchester consultation paper, which you referred to. So the figures are in that document you've referred to as being okay. So I don't understand. You know, I'm happy to discuss it outside the meeting after this motion, you know, if there's any merit in what you're saying. But I don't see what it means, to be quite honest, because it's 15.88 million the next 4 years. The figures are front-ended. The first 2 years take 12.6 million. Yeah, you've read that. And what we propose in Greater Manchester is to try and even it across the 4 years so we can manage any firefighter reductions. You're just saying, you know, something different again. So I think you need to be consistent. You know, there's a full paper, and I'm sure you've already, because I've sent it to you. Every councillor has received a copy of the 20-odd page document. So you've all had a chance to read it. 11th of January, I think I sent it you. And obviously, Councillor Lynn has been fully involved. So, as I said, I'm just confused. Willing to, as I said, to learn anything after the meeting, if you want to add anything, but I can't see I'm against this amendment. And also, what is the difference? The very last paragraph on the amendment, you drop the reference to the police. You know, I think that's a very strong area, what this motion refers to. And you're dropping that reference to the police, what have been reviewed, and their money have been changed. And you've dropped it. I don't know why. So I must be against it, although there is some merit in this.
Sitting Mayor, please.
Okay, thank you. We're living in a period of declining government grant to local government, including Greater Manchester and Salford. The Combined Authority has set its budget for this year on the basis of the reduced funding from government. And they can't do anything else other than that. The main motion is intended to call on government to recognise all the reasons why that is not a sensible situation and to reconsider at national level the budget for Greater Manchester in relation to the Fire and Rescue Service. Now, I can't accept the amendment. I understand that there is always a willingness on the part of the Conservative opposition to look to the tenor of language so that it's not seen as antagonistic to the government, and we can live with that. But what this amendment actually does is it actually blocks out the bit that almost every contributor to this discussion has acknowledged, including the Conservative contributors. And that is that the Fire and Rescue Service is not just important as it is a fire-fighting service. And it's the rescue part that gets knocked off the end of the table by this amendment. I can suspect why the Conservative amendment takes out the 15-point-odd million over 4 years, because that is uncomfortable for the government. That's what we're asking them to look at. But I have to say, in taking that out of the main motion, which this amendment would do, it also takes away that aspect of rescue. And I'll tell you this, unfortunately for us in Salford, we have again seen the effects of government cuts laid bare in the recent flood crisis. Because I saw our services stretched across Greater Manchester as I've never seen anything like it before. And we need to take that into consideration, that on the crisis side of things, it can be county-wide, and this has been explained by Councillor Dawson, across counties and across countries even. And so I have to, on this occasion, say that we should not vote in favour of this amendment, but we should vote in favour of the main motion.
Right, thank you. Can we now move to the vote for the amendment of the motion? All those in favour, please show. All those against, please show. Any abstentions? The amendment to the motion is lost. We will now return to the main debate on the main motion. Thank you. Anybody else want to speak on the main motion? Any comments or questions? We will now move to the vote of the motion. All those in favour, please show. All those against, please show. Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Many thanks. Thank you. It's now 11 o'clock. We are due for a little break for 10 minutes, so we'll have a take for 10 minutes. Okay. Okay, please be seated. Thank you. Thank you, Ben. Item 10, statement of the elected mayor. Thank you. The sitting mayor will now give his statement to council. Thanks.
My name is Ian Stewart. I am the City Mayor of the City of Salford. Chairman, can I start, before giving a report on the recent flood crisis in Salford, by saying that clearly the depth, breadth and width of this crisis is something which has never been experienced by the people of Salford in living memory. Indeed, in the time that records have been kept, there has never been a flood crisis of this magnitude. And it therefore demands the most serious of debates. My personal view is that we can start with the report today, but in itself, a discussion today, a report and discussion, will not be enough. Therefore, I can announce that the Council will have, at the very least, a policy forum day where when there is a report from the Council, it's quite clear that Greater Manchester will actually be reviewing the situation, and a formal report will come out, a statutory report will come out from Greater Manchester. But we in Salford will do our own review as well. And when those two reports are available, I would say to the Council that we should have a policy forum where an in-depth discussion and questions can be answered. And indeed, we may even have to have other debates after that. And the one thing that I'm clear about is this, that the attitude abroad in Salford up until Boxing Day was that we don't have floods in Salford. And I think we all know and understand now, by God, we have had a flood in Salford, the likes of which we've never seen before, and I'm sure that our intuition tells us that there will probably more within our lifetime. Hopefully not, but there probably will be, in my view. So, Chairman, I've always said that I'm proud to belong to the city of Salford, and I have to tell you that this pride has never been stronger than it has been over the last couple of weeks. I've also always said that the spirit of Salford resides within its people. And when I say that it resides within the hearts of the people of Salford, I have to say that spirit has, again, never been more visible than it was during the period of that flood crisis and in the aftermath of it since Boxing Day. Now, while the scale of the floods was unprecedented and unpredicted, my overriding memory will be the way the ordinary people of Salford came together to deal with the crisis, and that was truly exceptional. I fully understand this was and still is a trauma for everyone whose property and lives were affected. There have been 668 residential properties and approximately 196 business premises directly affected. It would have been, in my view, many, many more, but for the flood defences we already have in place, and indeed the £12 million investment that we've made with the government in the second flood basin, which now, I believe, will be fully operational later this year. That is a good thing. People will say, but the place flooded. And yes, it did. And I ask myself frequently, what does that matter about flood defences to people who were 4 feet deep in sewage-strewn water in their own homes? Not a lot to those people. But actually, had those flood defences not been there and worked to their full capacity, the water may have been more than 4 feet deep, and we may have been stood here talking about loss of life. I believe it was that successful in terms of how the flood defences functioned. Now, I have to say that it's clear that the defences were not adequate for the exceptional rainfall that we had. This is why I, as City Mayor, and our local councillors and our Salford MPs and Greater Manchester Mayor are lobbying the government for funding to further reduce future flood risk. And in my personal view, we need all to face and meet the challenge of global climate change. As soon as the alarm was raised by our own councillor Harry Davis, who phoned me at around 9:30 on Boxing Day morning, I contacted the City Director, who acted promptly in alerting David Hunter, who is the Council's Disaster and Response Head Officer. David arrived on site within about 30 to 40 minutes, and he called in the emergency services, the Environment Agency, the City Council staff, Salix Homes, and the council emergency plans were put into action. Workers from the council and other organisations put aside their own Christmas holiday celebrations to come to people's aids in the flood area, and in some cases those workers were risking their own safety to help others. For that, we will always be extremely grateful. A central emergency control group was immediately set up by the council in the Beacon Centre off London Street, including myself, senior officers from the council, the emergency services, Salix Homes, and other key partners. I am aware that many residents actually self-evacuated to stay with relatives or friends in unaffected areas. I'm also aware at this stage that there were 1 or 2 residents who have reported that they had no contact from the emergency and rescue services. I'm sorry for that. If it happened, I regret it. And, of course, we will look closely at how and if this can be eliminated during the Greater Manchester and Salford reviews, which, as I've already recounted, will be taking place. I have to say I'm just so relieved but there have been no reports to date of any fatalities. As I said earlier, in my view, this could have been much worse if Salford Council and its partners hadn't taken the action over the past years to put those flood defences and the plans into place. Now, evacuated residents were registered at the Beacon Centre, checked for health issues, given hot food and drinks if required, and then Salix Homes placed those who needed it straight into secure hotel accommodation. The system worked very well for those that we knew about and that we and the security services, the rescue services, had evacuated. But of course there were others who had self-evacuated, and in those circumstances it's difficult to know where people have gone and what they're doing. Now, some of them that self-evacuated went to, and I have to say our gratitude goes to the excellent St Boniface's Centre. St Boniface's and some of the local churches opened their doors because there was an assumption, like in a lot of floods and crises, that people may have to sleep on the floor for the night. The fact that the control centre and Salix Homes had acquired enough hotel accommodation to cater for everybody that we knew about wasn't necessarily broadly known. So some people slept in St Boniface's and others went to friends and family. Now, those St Boniface's and the local churches who opened their doors played a key role in supporting the central rescue efforts. I have to say, though, that sheltered accommodation and other organisations in the area had to move residents upstairs due, of course, to the ground floor being flooded. But amazingly, many vulnerable residents actually, I'm told, took this all in their stride. Local councillors, I'm a good advocate for the need for local politicians, local councillors, but again, it was shown clearly to me on Boxing Day why it's so important to have local politicians embedded and engaged in their own community. In the evening at the Beacon Centre, we had a situation where we had a key social services support worker who didn't live in Salford but needed to get to the vulnerable residents at Alexandra Gardens. And the 3 bridges in Broughton were down. So the key worker couldn't work out how to get to the vulnerable residents at Alexandra Gardens. And so I went to Councillor Peter Connor and Councillor Jim King, who were in the Beacon Centre at that point, and I asked them if they could assist. And what happened, of course, was that Councillor Connors and King took the key worker themselves and ploughed through the floods to get to Alexandra Gardens. Now, that not only shows that the local knowledge of councillors is really important, but all the local councillors, over the period of the whole crisis, every day were out in the community bringing back intelligence to the Crisis Control Centre and taking information from the Control Centre back to the residents. Was it good enough in terms of communications? No, but I'll come back to that later. I have to say that the way in Boxing Day, right, the first day, Boxing Day itself, the priorities in the plan were evacuation of the residents who were endangered, the assessment of the residents at the Beacon Centre for health, food, clothing and so on, and then the moving on of those residents to safe accommodation. That went very well. There was very rarely any more than one family in the Beacon Centre at a time because the system was moving so efficiently. The way the next day was the clean-up day. So the day after Boxing Day was the day when the professional council cleansing department staff came in, brought the machines in and had to clear the streets. The reason for that was that there was a slurry on the streets that was 4 or 5 inches thick, and it was important
to get the streets cleaned first before you invited any volunteers or any other support workers in, other than the emergency support workers. And so that took place, and that allowed all the volunteers to join with the local residents. So what you had was you had local residents and volunteers joined in to help each other, and after the river returned to normal levels, they rolled their sleeves up and set to work to clean up the devastation left behind. Neighbours helped neighbours, and young people in that estate, the Spike Island estate, residents told me, young people had knocked on the doors to the elderly and the disabled and other neighbours to ask if they needed any help in clearing their houses. And indeed, they gave sincere help. And I know that the residents there welcomed the actions of the youth of that area. Residents were supported by the likes of Helping Hands, our local handy person project, and many other individuals and organisations, including our Jewish, Muslim, Polish, other local ethnic communities and groups, asylum seekers and refugees, all joined in to help those so severely affected by the floods. Their collective efforts, residents and others, were magnificent. Now, in addition, Helping Hands and Emmaus, Community Transport, Mustard Tree, those organisations who store goods, white goods and clothes, Helping Hands and others were in using their own, Helping Hands used their own list of vulnerable residents in that area. They didn't wait to be asked. They phoned each of their most vulnerable residents to check how they were, and they were down like a shot on the ground helping out. And all those bodies have contributed to some degree in and hundreds of local people offered donations of food, cleaning materials, toys, clothes, furniture, fridges and money to help people who had lost their possessions in the flood. Salford CVS coordinated communications with voluntary organisations, voluntary sector partners, and played a key role in helping keep those bodies informed. Ordinary people doing exceptional things. This was Salford acting as a truly cooperative city. Again, my thanks to all those individuals and groups. Now, at this point, I want to take the opportunity to thank the media. It's not often that you hear politicians thanking media, but in this case it's relevant, and particularly to our local radio stations, Radio Manchester and Key 103, who played a fundamental role in keeping the public informed. And the same goes, of course, for Salford Online and the Manchester Evening News. When we look at the logistics of communications in a crisis, I have to tell you that I was surprised at the key role that our media, particularly our radio stations, played in that crisis, and will do, no doubt, if ever we have to face anything similar in the future. Now, returning to Boxing Day, I also contacted our 3 MPs, Graham Stringer, who's the MP that covers the area of Broughton, where Spike Island and the floods were there, Rebecca Long-Bailey, the MP for Salford and Eccles, and Barbara Keeley, the MP for Worsley and Eccles South. And I contacted the Greater Manchester Mayor, Tony Lloyd. It was quite clear, even on the first day, that we would need special help from government. So I contacted our MPs and our Greater Manchester Mayor to ask them to lobby government for immediate funds to relieve affected residents and businesses. Now, I have to say, within 2 days, I had a call directly from Baroness Susan Williams, who asked me how things had gone, and she asked me what were the needs. I certainly took the opportunity to explain that the residents and businesses needed immediate relief, but that Salford needed longer-term help to help build our flood defences for the future. because we had never experienced a crisis like this before. And then I have to say that within 4 days, by the 30th of January, and I've worked in government when I was an MP, but I have to say that the DCLG department acted with the urgency that was required. And there was a pot of money given to Greater Manchester, around £50 million as I understand it. Out of that, Salford got £526,000. And this was to help with that immediate relief that families and individuals needed. Now that allowed Salford to set up an immediate relief fund. Our council finance team set to work from the Booth Charities building in the area through the Broughton Trust office to direct £500 to affected households. Within a day, more than 300 families had money in their bank account. Having been on site and toured the whole area every day since Boxing Day, I quickly realised that businesses and their own voluntary organisations who were depleting their resources in response to the crisis should also receive an initial payment of £500 each. To date, 391 households, 72 businesses and 3 voluntary organisations have received an initial payment of £500. Now, the £500 payments were only intended by the Council to be immediate relief. I fully appreciate that this in itself is not enough, and that is why I am announcing today that, prompted by organisations like the Booth Charities who wish to contribute and help the victims of the floods, the Council has launched its own ongoing Salford Distress Fund. That is to help those in distress get back on their feet after the disastrous impact of the Boxing Day floods. Now, the Salford Distress Fund payments will be in addition to the £500 immediate relief payment, and I have approved the City Council's provision of financial resources of £1 million to be taken from reserves to kick-start the Salford Distress Fund. We hope the Distress Fund will also be receiving donations from organisations and individuals across the city and wider, and therefore anyone wishing to donate to the Salford Distress Fund, please visit the Council's website for details. Now, the fund will help local people to replace items such as basic furniture, white goods, fridges, freezers and washing machines, and essential clothing and childcare equipment damaged by the floods. These are examples, and it is not exhaustive, but it is where these are not replaced by landlords or insurance. The Council has also agreed to offer residents who have been forced to vacate their homes and businesses who are unable to trade help with their council tax or business rates, with details on how to apply being on the Council's website. We know that the perception that £500 was not in any sense going to meet the concerns of local residents. This is why we are moving to try and provide more assistance and support. Now, our flood recovery grant scheme for businesses is being finalised, which will release the remainder of the business support funding to eligible businesses. Salford Council's business support team continues to engage with flood-affected businesses and are working in partnership with the Greater Manchester Business Growth Hub. That is part of the Greater Manchester Growth Company. And they will offer support and guidance to businesses to help them access the scheme and ensure grants are used to help get businesses trading successfully and sustainably as quick as possible. The other angle to that, of course, is that whilst the businesses are not running, the local people who work in those businesses do not have a job. So the quicker we get the businesses up and running, the quicker the workforce can get back to work. Government-funded support has also now been announced to provide up to £5,000 grants for homeowners and businesses to help fund additional flood resistance measures or resilience measures for properties. Now, what this means is that if you own a house, or if you own your own house, you can apply for up to £5,000 to improve your house's defences against future floods. If you are a tenant of Salix, then it is Salix Homes who will apply for the money and make the improvements in their own properties. So it's important that if you're not clear about whether you can apply for this, you phone the council and the numbers that are available. So finally, I want to say this. I alluded to it in the debate earlier about the Fire and Rescue Service. But I saw for the first time, we've had emergencies, and I've seen the emergency services work very successfully, very efficiently, very professionally. We've all got our descriptions of how much we value these services. But I have to tell you, with a wide crisis, geographical crisis, that is not only within Greater Manchester, but as you heard Councillor Dawson explain, the Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service, for example, but so do the police and the ambulance service, go to other counties and indeed, as Jim pointed out, sometimes have to go to other countries. But I saw for myself how stretched our emergency and rescue services really were with such a crisis. There were some novel incidents or things that went on. For example, I was surprised as anybody to see the mountain rescue volunteers in their kayaks with their sticks. And you didn't know what the sticks were for until you found out that they were testing the depth of the water to see if it was safe to wade through it, so that residents could be evacuated. They were very experienced, much wider. They're used to dealing with these things all the time. But I thank them for coming from Derbyshire, Cheshire, Greater Manchester to help us in Salford. The top and bottom of this, in my view, is that I want to say a heartfelt thank you to everyone who helped and who continue to help the people of Salford recover from the floods. Your hard work, your kindness and your true spirit of Salford is truly appreciated, and it is what makes this city so strong, resilient and great. We will indeed face challenges like this in the future, but we will try to improve where we have seen maybe shortcomings and failings even in our plan. I'll finally say this because there are I know of one, but possibly two residents who have written saying, we were left on our own. We had no contact on the night. As I say, I'm sorry for that if that happened, and I really regret it. But that's the type of thing that we need to try and work our way through as we have our debate in the future. And it's why this issue will not go away quickly. We will debate it properly. We will review everything that we've done. I will certainly be writing, giving congratulations and thanks to those organisations and individuals who played key roles. And I wish I could write to every resident that was in that estate and was affected. But I can't, so I'll say it here. My thanks to them, not only for looking after themselves, but looking after each other. That is the true spirit of Salford.
Many thanks, City Mayor. Item 11, general questions or comments to the elected City Mayor. Councillor King, please.
Thank you, Chair. To be fair, the City Mayor has covered most of the things that I was going to relate to, and I'll try not to repeat, but some small sort of personal memories from the floods. And there have been floods in the past, of course. On the great floods, I mentioned, I think it was the last time we were here, that I live on the great floodplains of Salford. Not realising that, in fact, I was going to experience a flood within a couple of months. I actually live on the floodplain, and I got a text saying that the floods were beginning to move up and there was a potential danger, but the note said there was Heath Road, and I thought, well, I don't have a Heath Road in Barton, so I thought, oh, well, it's relaxed. And I might say I had friends staying from Europe. I just picked them up at the airport a couple of days before Christmas, and I also had significant building work going on my house, so just before Christmas and after Christmas, so I had enough to deal with, to be honest. But I thought, I better nonetheless check, because we do have a Heath Avenue. So I thought, I'll drive down, and just a couple of hundred yards down from my house, there were pockets of people. And I thought, wow, the flood's actually here. They're very, very close to my house, and I've got a basement in the house, so the basement might flood. So I got out, and my ordinary shoes on, before I realised that I was up to my ankles in water. And people were getting very, very worried. And they said, well, they realised I'm a local councillor because I live locally. And they said, well, do you want to come round the back? They live on the bank of the river bridge. The wall had been overtopped. And the flood was coming into their back gardens, was flooded up to your knee level, and their backyards was actually flooding. The kids, I might add, were delighted because and the parents, stressed parents, saying, you'll get out of the water, kind of thing. And some of the guys started putting silicone on the backs of the doors to stop the water from coming in, and it was just fraction away. And they asked me if I had any, were there any sandbags available? And I said, well, I presume there are some. And I said, I'll try and find out. So I got back in my car and I drove down, further down the road, and I spoke to the fire service and the police service, and they radioed people and all. Unfortunately, by that time, the sandbag supply had exhausted. Now, I didn't feel like going back to tell them that there were no sandbags left, but nonetheless I did. But fortunately, the floods actually didn't come into those houses. All around it was flooded. The road was flooded. I then drove back down. I know the area fairly well, and it was clear to me, and several people approaching me, so what's happening? It was clear to me at that stage that was beyond the capacity of the City Council. I said the government has got to step in. We just simply don't have the resources to do other than the emergencies. And of course, as the Mayor has rightly said, it is beyond the capacity of the City Council. We just simply have to get government support. And to be fair, a couple of days later, when Baroness Williams came, we drove around. She was actually very receptive, to be honest. And I think the Mayor has alluded to that. And we now know that there is some support coming in. But because I know the place very well, there are two major bridges going into Bolton, so I'll nip down and see it. And I just could not believe the volume, the velocity, the force of the flood. And I now see why people could get lost in floods. If your dog goes out into it, for example, you try and rescue the dog that gets carried away, you just could not imagine you could float an ocean-going liner on that river that night. And I was absolutely shocked at the power and volume of the flood, actually. And I saw underneath the bridge, there was a huge log, about 30 feet long, 2 or 3 men need to carry it, and it was bobbing around, bumping against that bridge, just like a matchstick. And there was a barrel, which you or I couldn't hardly lift, and it was just like a cork. And that was the power of that. And if anybody at all went into that flood that night, they would almost certainly be lost. As the Mayor rightly said, there was no loss of life and no loss of limb. And as far as I'm aware, no loss of domestic animals. And I met a woman who was coming back from work, and she says, my cats are inside. And the crikey, we're enough to worry about, but a cat. And she did manage to get down. I understand that she rescued the cat, fortunately. So these are the worries that people have. You don't imagine that people worry about a cat when people's houses are flooding. But as the Mayor has rightly said, the response from the local community was instant, and it was overwhelming. In fact, it was almost difficult to organise at the early stages. People coming in from everywhere. I saw people from all over the place. So people coming in from right around the city and beyond. And it was targeting them and so on was quite difficult at first. And on one road, there were so many people, I suggested to the organising volunteers, say, look, don't send any more down there. Because there were loads of cars, loads of wagons picking up furniture and so on. The City Council removed tons of people's furniture. If you can imagine the bottom floor of your house, everything in it, carpets, rugs, soft furniture, white goods, Kids' toys, sadly, 2 days after Christmas, kids' toys being thrown on the road. Sad, very, very sad, and children frightened and so on. It was the most shocking experience that I've had for a very, very long time. But the people of Salford responded magnificently. But we must also respond, and we must look at climate change. I know some of the right-wingers and Lord Lawson's and others said that there isn't such a thing as climate change. Well, something's happening. The volume of the rain that fell for those couple of days was well beyond what falls naturally and normally. There is something, I will line up, there is something happening, and we must begin to address that. Otherwise, there will be other similar floods, and I certainly don't want to see another 1,000 of my constituents flooded in 2 months' time, or 3 months' time, or 2 years' time, or whenever it is. For me, these were ordinary heroes, those people who helped out that night. Every single one, even those people who were flooded themselves, they helped out others who were probably in a worse state, or who were older or not able or whatever. And I think it's the people of those resilient people, we talk about resilient people at the last council meeting, these people are very resilient. But now, post-trauma, they're beginning to realise they need more help, and we need to get the application forms sorted out in order for them to get those houses back into condition. It'll take about 6 weeks for them to dry out or thereabouts, probably as much as 6 months actually, before they're back fully repaired and so on. But thank you to everybody who did help out on the day. Several councils came around and helped out, and there was plenty of volunteers. And as I said, the people of Lower Broughton deserve any kind of compensation or help and support and congratulation that they get. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I firstly endorse everything that the City Mayor has said in his speech, and of course even what Councillor King has said, although he didn't mention bees, which surprised me. Many moons ago, having seen firsthand the devastation that flooding causes, having stood by a wall, not far from a wall that Councillor King described, 6 foot high, and seen water come straight over the top of it, having seen manhole covers shoot up in the air with the force of water, and watch poor residents see the water invade, as Councillor King has said, the ground floor, and then the clean-up, throwing one's prized possessions in a skip, the things they worked hard for to achieve, just been tossed in a skip, thoroughly ruined. It left me many years ago with that fear of the force of nature, the force of flooding. And, it's something that once you've experienced it, it's like most things, until you've experienced it, it's very hard to understand it. But it is devastating, and it still affects me today. If I see some water laying near a gully, I think, that's the start. Starts to back up. So, having said that, I'd also like to thank the City Mayor for keeping me informed of developments, although I wasn't in Salford, but as he's always done, he's always kept me informed of what's happening, and I'm grateful to that. I'd like to thank everyone who helped out, too many to mention individually, so if I did, I would leave someone out, and that would be upsetting. But everyone that had anything to do with it, the clean-up, the gully people have worked marvellously. I saw them in my own road the other day, and actually wrote to Peter Openshaw to commend them on the thoroughness. They spent all morning in that road doing the gullies. I was really impressed. Another person I think I ought to mention is Councillor Antipas, who always sends emails out with flood alerts, with information, keeping councillors fully informed. And a lot of emails do go in my deleted box, but yours isn't one of them, sir. And I'm very grateful for you raising the awareness of these floods. I think it's important, and I'm really appreciative that he does so. Looking forward, as what happened in the area that I was representing that was so badly flooded, it was a 1 in 100-year occurrence. It happened twice in 3 months, actually, and millions had to be spent to rectify it. And I think that's the next stage. We have to prevent it. We have to do all we can to prevent it. And if that means us going down to Whitehall, then so be it. I'm quite happy to attend and the case, because it is so devastating, and of course after the event you have to get insurance. And that I wouldn't think would be easy, and that was the problem where I represented. It's, you know, insurance is a risk-based thing, and once you've had it in, it's very difficult to argue. But anyway, I'll finish there, but I'm really, really impressed with everything that we did in Salford. And again, thank you to the City Mayor, thank you to Councillor Antrobus for keeping us alert. I'm sure this will continue to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think most of what I wanted to say has already been stated, but I just wanted to add a personal observance. For those of you who don't know, I actually come from the Ribble Valley, and I originate from a village that's about half a mile up the road from Ribchester, which was on the news constantly throughout the flooding. So I actually got to see the flooding in basically two different contexts. And when I remember sitting there on Boxing Day evening with our next door neighbours who sadly had flooded, and he said to me, "I bet you wish you stayed in Manchester, his house had just flooded," so I didn't correct him on Salford. And I showed him a photograph of the Lowry Hotel, and I said, actually no, I probably wouldn't have been any better off. But the fact of the matter is I actually probably would have been, because when I got back the day afterwards, it was already, the clean-up had already started. The day after, you could barely tell that anything had happened. The response from this council was absolutely first rate. It was the textbook definition of what you would want in a crisis. And I think we need to actually look at this in the context. It was a crisis. It wasn't a bit of flooding. This was a once-in-a-100-year event. This was catastrophic, and the response was absolutely superb. And I've got to echo Councillor Turner's sentiments on Councillor Antrobus. I mean, it can seem desperately unsexy sometimes talking about flood defences, but to be brutally honest, I'm very glad that he does, and I'm very glad that he pays the amount of attention he does. We do need to lobby the government for more. There is undoubtedly a change in the way that the climate is behaving. We are seeing more and more flooding. We had it earlier last year. We had it the year before. So something is changing, and our response has to change too. But I've got to say that the people of this city, the council, the officers, everything was superbly done, and I just wanted to reiterate my thanks and my pride in the way that we've dealt with it.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, of course, I'm not going to repeat everything that has been said, but it is a reason to celebrate, really, that we had no loss of life, and just hard to imagine that statistically Salford has more families with young children than anywhere else in the national average in the nation, and there was no loss of life. It was truly remarkable. Well, thank God for that. And also, as Ian mentioned, the City Mayor Ian Stewart mentioned earlier that different communities came together, and I believe I'm the only non-British born person in this room. It was just so moving, and I've lived in this country for 20 years, and I'm still in admiration of this nation, love this nation, my home, and I just know because of circumstances, but I just love this nation, and the way, the compassion always overcomes. When my husband and I were helping at the Beacon Centre, of course you have people talking and you hear stories in Salford. You always have somebody tell us stories. And it wasn't really so much the worker who came from his holiday. I think it was supposed to be after the 6th of January, but he was there helping, and he wasn't playing a martyr role. He was just doing it day after day as if it was normal for him. It wasn't so much the story about an elderly lady who was sitting outside of her home in a chair holding the ashes of her husband, the most treasured possession. I mean, these things just, year after year, keep my heart absolutely in love with this nation and the people in this city. But it was the fact, this one story, being an immigrant, that was close to my heart. Apparently there was a lady, a business lady, I haven't met her personally, but that's a story. She was from either Asian or Middle Eastern background, and we have challenges from within and from without that we're not going into now, but she was a businesswoman who moved into the area, was persecuted, oppressed, I don't know what the right word is, but because she was foreign, and I had been through that, eggs in the window, ketchup on the doorstep, all that, and in spite of that, in spite of the fact she is moving out of the area, in spite of any of that, that she's moving her family, somewhere else, she still, during the floods, was bringing vans with detergents and cleaning materials. And I thought I thought of this spirit of Salford that the city mayor mentions time and time again. We can only overcome any challenges, difficulties, evil itself with good. I just wanted to say, how much I appreciate the wonderful city and the people we live in.
Many thanks, Councillor Birch. Councillor Greedo, please.
Thank you, Chair. I won't say very long because everything has been said. Just really to say that I think this is probably one of the rare occasions I would probably agree with every word that the city mayor has uttered on this matter. So we really can't do any better than what we've actually said, City Mayor. And I think it's a great honour to be a resident of Salford when we see the way that we have responded to this disaster. And it was a disaster. You can't call it by any other name. I think the steps which have been taken are certainly in the right direction. The steps since the floods have receded, and certainly the setting up of the disaster fund, I think, is a step in the right direction. I do hope it's supported by everybody that can support in Salford, certainly all those businesses that employ people within the city of Salford. I hope that they will show their community spirit and support the disaster fund. I know other charities, such as the Blue Charities you mentioned, through you, Chair, will also support it. There is one thing that, in fact, Councillor Turner touched on, and which I'd already made note about, and that was the issue of insurance. And I think this is going to be an important issue, which as a council we need to take on board. It's going to be, I don't know what the percentage of those who were affected did not have insurance cover, and I think it would be useful to know that figure. Was it 50%, 60%, 90%? I don't know. But I think we need to find out what the extent of that problem is for those people who were affected who did not have insurance. And I think we need to look at how we can actually help those people in future. Is there a way, and maybe this could be through the disaster distress fund which has been set up, is there a way that we could actually help them with premiums to actually set up insurance policies? It's going to be even more expensive for them now. In fact, some people may not be able to get insurance, but where insurance might be possible, but I do think that maybe that is one area that we need to look at for the future, because if we can actually help to supply them with some reassurance, it's partly going to help the council in the future in terms of the amount of money it would have to find, or indeed the government, but it's going to help, more importantly, the people in those houses. So that's one area I'd really like us to look at, and it might well be on the list already, Mr Mayor. And apart from that, I think that the three words which you used, I think, which was, well, I remember two of them, resilience and great, in terms of the people of Salford and the council. I think were very, very apt words, and I would certainly align myself to those comments.
I will rise to make response to Councillor Garrido because he had specific asks, and mainly around the issue of insurance. Yes, it is complex and difficult. We've already been looking at it. We've heard figures bandied round, for example, and I'm not saying that it's true, that 90% of people in the estate had no insurance. That may actually be a misunderstanding on the basis that, so Councillor Merritt will be referring to this in her statement, but I'll say that it is, now what I'm going to do is give way to Councillor Merritt if she wants to make reference to that at this point, or do you want to wait until later?
those people. Just to say, I mean, I did send an update round to people. Salix were insured for their homes, but obviously for them there will be a significant rise in their future insurance, so that's something for them to have to deal with. I think that a large, substantial proportion, I'm not sure as high as 90, but certainly of Salix tenants were not insured. Fortunately, it's not really fortunate because, you know, Jim will attest that an awful lot of damage was done. But the flood water went in and out fast enough for the damage not to be too substantial in many of those homes. They will still need insurance to cover things like carpets, white goods and stuff. But a lot, you know, they are managing to live, most of them, downstairs with bits of things on the floor and things. So that's just an update of where they actually are now.
That I suppose substantiates what I was going to go on to say. The figures may be completely inaccurate. The one that was bandied round, about 90% of people not have insurance, may have arisen from an initial statement that Salix Homes, of course, as the landlord, have their responsibilities as outlined by Councillor Merritt, but people can have their own private household goods insurance. Now, Salix Homes has their own insurance, household goods insurance, and we know that around only 10% to 15% of Salix residents, tenants, had taken up that insurance. So that may be where people have this perception that it's around 90% that don't have it. Personally, I think there will be more residents that actually had household insurance, but nobody knows. And so my answer to Councillor Garrido is it's very complex. I heard what Councillor Garrido said about could the distress fund in the future help with premiums. I'm not confident that that would be allowable, but we'll certainly look at it. What I am more inclined to is to see the role of the credit union encouraged within the estate, because if we can help to enhance the role of the credit union, then very much more affordable banking and loans can be accessed quickly by local residents. So we're looking at all sorts of things. It stands to reason that you assume that businesses must have insurance to function. Well, yes, but then you find a whole range of businesses, their insurances have had the flood clause excluded. And the reason, I suppose, is because there has been an attitude abroad in Salford, we don't have floods in Salford. Well, we do, and we do big style now, and probably in the future. So all of those things that make it complex to say anything about insurance, but we're certainly looking at it, and it's an issue that can be raised within the policy forum and discussed in detail when the reports are available.
Thank you, City Mayor. Councillor Walsh, please.
Yeah, on behalf of the Assistant Mayor and myself, we'd like to commend and give our thanks to our public health team who ensured, certainly by October, where's my... December the 27th, I believe, because of the... I'll be like John. John always is like that, don't you? Yeah. Must go with the name. Thanks to Sue Hill and the marketing team, we'd already got it on our website by December 27th, how to deal with contamination. The CCG and the GPs and the pharmacists and everybody else in the area worked extremely hard to try and get services back as normal as possible. And we are assured by the CCG that Mocha Parade is now operating normally, I hope, Jimmy, and that, is that right? That's what they tell us, and that the Lower Broughton Health Centre was more significantly affected, but they're using their branch surgery premises in the Energised Centre for the majority of patient contact. Is that right? Yeah. District nursing services, who also use the health service, health centre, have also been affected. but they're now back to normal, and the CCG is quite happy to take part in any debrief that will happen both within the council and in Greater Manchester, but thanks everyone in the public health team for their response.
Thank you, Councillor Ross. Councillor Jones, please.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask the City Mayor and Councillor Antrobus if they, when they're discussing the flooding, if you like, in the future, how we can avoid, a repetition of what's happened on the flooding, if they could raise the issue of the Manchester Ship Canal. Because when you live adjacent to the Ship Canal, you're always told that you're very lucky the Ship Canal never floods. And if you Google the Manchester Ship Canal, you're told that the depth of the water in the canal is governed by the 6 sets of sluice gates and by the 2 weirs. And of course at Earlham, there are sluice gates and there is a weir. But on the day in question, even though it was nothing like the flooding elsewhere in Salford, there was a flood near Earlham Locks. Now, within 48 hours, I'd written to the the Environment Agency. I'm on to transport again. The Environment Agency, and I also wrote to Peel Holdings. I got an acknowledgement from the Environment Agency. I've written again to Peel Holdings, and I've not had an acknowledgement or a reply. And when you don't get a reply, you always sort of suspect something that, maybe there was nothing suspicious. But then at a meeting last week in Earlham and Cadishead, the fire service told us that the sluice gates were automatic these days, not like the old days, and you press a button and they work, except the ones at Earlham didn't work, and therefore there was a problem on the day in question, which probably was the reason why the flooding happened. But the other issue... In Earlham. But the other issue is just one, because I'm no expert in this area, I don't understand exactly, obviously, all the information that Derek sends out, but the Irwell does flow into the Manchester Ship Canal. So, of course, you sort of think to yourself, well, if the Ship Canal, in times of stress, the depth was a lot lower than it normally is, surely that would help to relieve the River Irwell of water, or maybe it wouldn't, but that's the way most of us would think. So I just want to make sure that the Environment Agency and Peel Holdings, and obviously Salford City Council through the City Mayor, are taking account of these issues, and can we try and look at the depth of the Ship Canal and whether we can influence that, especially in times of very high rainfall and so on.
Councillor Antrobus, do you want to respond to that question now? Okay. Councillor McIntyre.
Thank you. Again, I'm not going to repeat the repetition, but there's a few people I think that need to be congratulated and thanks. I don't think anybody that was involved can be thanked too much, but it's important to remember Ibis and the Novotel, who gave up some of their bedrooms to accommodate the people that had to move home. I think they should be congratulated and thanked for the things that they've done. I think when it comes to housing, we have to include Elbow Valley and Contour Homes, some of which were involved in the flooding area. And I think the volunteers that manned the Beacon Centre and Boniface Centre did a fantastic job, not just of taking control of the donations that were made, but being able to offer a hello, a sit down, a shaking hands, and just reassuring people that things were bad, but things were workable. And that was a great emotional feeling that people needed to have filled at that time. I think as well, we have to look at the donations of food that came in. I mean, there was bakers that came in with a truckload of bread that were donated in Bonifaces. There was a hot food wagon parked on the street that provided hot food, hot drinks to the people who were volunteering in the area. And I think that needs to be recognised as well. And somebody or something that we never usually have is a good word to say about the stories that are carried up at the council in the Salford Star. But again, when we're talking about the media, they were really good and very appreciative of what was happening in Lower Broughton, one of the good areas, or they're mainly adopted areas, but they're also complementary about the things that were happening on the street for the clearing up and the support people were getting there. So I think when we're looking at media, that was a very positive and different positive story that was being run and lived at the same time. Councillors Wheeler, the senior, and Councillor Wheeler, the junior, and myself did a collection on echoes, and we noticed some of the people, and some of the people from Broughton and Spike Island spoke to us as we were collecting things like mops, buckets, cleaning fluids. And there was an incident where this man had been begging on the street, and he came up with his money tub, and he emptied it into the bucket and said thank you, for that's where he used to live. You know? I visited some of the companies in Rugby Street, you know, and people were having to enter the ground floor of their homes, and you know, it was heartbreaking. But we went into the storerooms of some of these businesses in Rugby Street, and their whole, and I mean whole, thousands and thousands of pounds worth of lost stock because of the floods that they endured. But to get into the shops, you had to go through and walk through that 4 inches of sludge before you get into the shops. And they was busy trying to clean up outside the shop to allow people to get inside the shop. And it was really, it was a disaster for them. Green Grosvenor Park, you know, a fantastic amount of work had been done by the Friends of Green Grosvenor Park to create a park from a piece of green space that was a floodplain, and the work that they had done over 2 years was destroyed. And they are, as we're speaking, they're starting to rebuild and replant some of the things that they had done as a community, but they were grateful that that was there as a floodplain because their houses were spared, you know. So I have to recognise, and we have to recognise, that the building of New Broughton countryside properties, it was well thought out, and the floodplain that they included within their plans was so well thought out, it saved and spared the residents in the new houses a lot of the pain that the people at the other side of the road were experiencing. And that's the same for the Riverview Primary School. It escaped the majority of the flood. The basement was the only thing that was touched. Now, again, that was through a forethought when it came to developing that patch of space in New Broughton. And I know that if the kids had been in school while these floods happened, you know, we could have been talking about the loss of life. And in some places, you were talking about 3 feet and 5 feet water. But because the school planning in the development stages was so thoughtful of what might occur, and also because the school was empty, that wasn't the case. Again, just reiterating the use of reserve funding. In my personal view, that's the proper use of using reserves, and to know that there's £1 million of reserve money going to that community in an attempt to rebuild what they've lost is ideal. And I think, you know, to be able to set up a distress fund as well, and just reiterate what Councillor Garrido said, it needs to be supported. It will be supported by the people in this chamber, but it will be supported by the people throughout Salford. Insurance was an issue that was a concern to me because a lot of people, residents, and a lot of businesses there had insurance, but the insurance policy didn't cover flooding, and that is something that when we're looking at insurance, we need to do that. Yeah. And just one final thing. As I said, I'm really grateful there were so many councillors that came into Broughton from their places. You would expect that the Broughton councillors would be there and involved, but to watch people coming from the other areas in Salford was fantastic, and also to watch the 3 MPs coming in and helping out on the street was good. But I think that the cleansing department and the work that they had done could never be thanked enough or often enough for the work that they have done. And that's it. Thanks.
Thanks for that. It's just a brief one. Won't repeat, obviously, the many thanks that other people have made, but I think the key thing is to get a thorough, ensure that the review that's made of what happened is thorough, and we get to the bottom of what went on. Not in a blame, allocating way and things like that, because that doesn't work, but just to ensure that the response next time is better, because there will be a next time, we can be sure of that. One thing to be aware, of course, is that 600 properties were flooded, and that's 600 families, and that won't go away overnight. There'll be problems on Spike Island and the surrounding area for a long time, and I would urge everybody, obviously, to vote for the support for the distress fund. That's important. But one of the things we mustn't, I think, lose sight of, though, and again, not in a blame game way, but it's got to be got right next time, was the lack of notice from the Environment Agency. If it wasn't for Councillor Harry Davis acting as an early warning system, we won't be able to rely on that next time, though. Obviously, we'll be insisting Harry walks his dog every day, just in case. But there was something must have gone wrong there, that the Environment Agency did not alert Salford Council. The Met Office knew the rain was falling upstream, must have done. People take measurements on that, and we need to know why earlier warning wasn't given, so that the council and everybody else could mobilise the resources. So I think that's one that mustn't be lost sight of.
I'm just going to mention it's now almost 20 past 12, and guillotine is at 12:30. Would any members like to move a motion to continue to a particular time? Or should we just carry on?
Stop at 12:30.
And stop at 12:30. Stop at 12:30?
Okay, given the time limits, I'll try not to repeat what has already been said, but I do want to begin by expressing my sympathy for the families affected. There is nothing more traumatic, I think, than experiencing a flood, and it's not only the effects on your property and the physical effects, but also the psychological and emotional effects, which can last a long time. And I agree with Councillor Wheeler that we need to stick with that community over the whole of the recovery period. These were record events. Just to put this into context, I understand that the water levels on the Irwell were a full metre above the water levels that we experienced in 1946, when I think something like 5,000 properties were affected. So, if you think of the scale, the amount of water that came into the catchment was so much greater, and yet this is no consolation to those properties affected, but the damage was so much less, and I think that's a tribute not only to the defences that have been put in by the Environment Agency, but also, as Councillor McIntyre has alluded to, the planning policies, where we've made sure that any development in that area is adapted to flood risk. We've talked about the impact on households and businesses, quite rightly, and I won't repeat that, but I think what we haven't mentioned is the impact on infrastructure. So as well as properties being affected, we've also had damage to the bridges possibly. We'll need to continue to inspect the bridges, because once there has been scouring and followed by the very cold snap, I think that we just need to be alert to the potential damage, and we're seeing damage to our highways, which may be associated with the flooding. We've experienced 1 or 2 collapses in the past few days. United Utilities have had a severe impact on their infrastructure, especially with the water treatment works, and that is going to cost an enormous amount to put right. And in the meantime, has quite a significant impact on the on water quality in the channels. And we also heard about the gas explosion, so gas supplies were also affected, and we know that in some parts of Greater Manchester, electricity was also affected, and there was a very, very serious risk associated with the a coma site in the area. So we mustn't close our eyes to the fact that there's a very serious impact on our infrastructure. At the moment, the Environment Agency is carrying out inspections on 6,000 flood defence assets in the Irwell, just in the Irwell catchment. So that's riverbanks, bridges, the weirs, telemetry, and all sorts of things. And this is a painstaking investigation which requires specialist knowledge, and that's being carried out as we speak, but it will take some time, and that will influence when we can report back, because we do need to make sure that this is an evidence-based report and not jump to conclusions, because some things might seem very obvious. So Councillor Wheeler said, for example, that there wasn't a warning, therefore something must have gone wrong at the Environment Agency. Well, that's not necessarily true, because there are scenarios which can explain that, which demonstrate that the system was okay, but something unexpected in our knowledge and understanding of the way the catchment worked was the issue, not something that had gone wrong. So it's very important that we do wait for the evidence and look at that. As part of the evidence, we will be looking at what happened at the Manchester Ship Canal. Recently, in fact, as a result of Salford's flood risk management strategy, the Manchester Ship Canal Company have agreed with the Environment Agency and all the lead local flood authorities alongside the canal that they will create a coordination group to make sure that flood risk along the Ship Canal is managed effectively, and that's a positive thing. I suspect that you can't, we can manage the levels in the Ship Canal, but what you can't do is flood Warrington in order to protect, in order to achieve a very worthy objective of protecting Irwell. And of course, what we've got to remember is that the Ship Canal below Warrington is tidal, so you've got to take account of the fact that at a high tide you can't let the water out. And in fact, one of the issues that we faced during the recent flooding was that there were very high tides at the same time. The focus is now has got to be on recovery, and I'm very anxious that the recovery should be resilient. So our officers are talking to Salix Homes at the moment, because what the government has given is some flexibility of the use of the £5,000 grant. So it need not be individual applications for funding, but we can actually use that to prepare a community scheme if that's a more effective and efficient way of going forward. And those discussions are taking place at the moment. Can I just make one more point? As you know, I chair the North West Regional Flood and Coastal Committee, and by chance the committee is meeting this coming Friday in Salford, at Salford University, and members will be going out to look at the affected areas. We originally came down to look at the second flood basin, but there are two issues that are being suggested there, which you may be interested in. One is to put together a package of funding to offer help and advice to communities and the public authorities about how we can make sure that there is a resilient recovery. So we'll be working in partnership with the National Flood Forum to provide that advice service. And secondly, we will be looking at one of an investment in slow the flow initiatives. This means trying to reduce the amount of water coming from upstream into the lower parts of the catchment through planting trees and other aspects of land management. And I think that the River Irwell, the Irwell catchment will be one of the areas that we're looking at. So I think there'll be two pieces of positive news coming out of Friday's meeting for the City of Salford.
Thank you. I travel round twice a day round the area from the Beacon Centre, and I did that quite deliberately. I didn't stop to engage very much with residents because I could see in their faces the day after Boxing Day they didn't want a politician saying I'm here to help. They were traumatised and they wanted to get on with it. But I'll have to say some special thanks, particularly to the family in Heath Avenue who allowed me to come into their house every day so I could see how the situation was progressing through the week. I did get a bit paranoid, concerned, when I heard the rain on my conservatory roof, a week and 2 weeks later, looking at the Environment Agency site to make sure we weren't in flood situation again. But my special thanks to, therefore, Amy and her husband in Heath Avenue, and special thanks to Derek Antrobus for everything that he has kept in the forefront of our heads for many years. Harry Davis, of course, for giving the alarm in the first place. He was the first person that raised it. David Hunter, our officer, who stayed every day. In fact, in the first day, we had to instruct him to go home at 11:30 at night. And he in particular, I need to make. George Blagden from the Beacon Centre, who opened up. He was there earlier than anybody else, and he was there later than everybody else, all through the period. Now, I will be trying to get the information about who else helped, and I know some, but let me know, please, don't hesitate for it to be repetitive. Let me know, and I will make a personal effort to thank everybody concerned. Remember the Policy Forum. Can I now tell you that I am under the impression that I have the power as Mayor to take the £1 million out of reserves, but just in case I don't, can I please now move that we endorse the removal of the taking of £1 million from reserves, up to £1 million from reserves, to set up the fund, the distress fund. On time.
Just like to mention that now, this is the meeting. The next meeting will be on the 24th of February, which is the usual, and the council calendar will be chairing the council meeting.